Hi, I'm DivKid and welcome to this video on expanding your semi-modular synthesizers with advanced patching to further your sound design and synthesis. I'll be doing that with the new Mavis from Moog, which we'll be exploring throughout. So let's check out what's to come. This video is sponsored by Moog and Source Distribution. So if you're wanting to make the Mavis wavefolder fully CV controllable, or you want to add symmetry to a wavefolder, or to explore a massively underrated harmonic treat from PWM, if you want to create a noise oscillator, or if you'd even like to turn your envelopes into oscillating wave shapers, then this video is for you. While I'll be exploring and demonstrating Mavis here from Moog, many of these patches will apply to hardware modular, semi-modular gear, or even software, so you can try out all these patches on your own systems. Mavis follows on from the Workstat family of Moog instruments. It builds on the synthesis path, adds more synthesis parameters, controls, more patching, and it's fully Eurorack compatible. So before we dive into all these more advanced synthesis patches and push semi-modular synths, let's first check out what Mavis is and what it does. So here's Mavis, and let's go through its sound and features. This is just perched on top of this modular case here for the benefit of seeing what's going on this scope. Now we'll go through the signal path first, and we can just play this simply from a volt per octave and the gate signal, or from the onboard keyboard. The default signal path takes an oscillator, into a filter, into a VCA. The oscillator can blend between saw and square wave shapes. We can pulse width modulate that square wave or pulse. And we can modulate the VCO, the PWM on the VCO, from the envelope, or from the LFO. With a nice wide-ranging LFO there on Mavis. The oscillator goes into the filter, which is that classic Moog ladder low-pass filter. Goes nicely resonant. And again, we can modulate this from a blend of the envelope with positive or negative amounts of modulation, modulating from any blend of that envelope and LFO you so desire. Now the VCA can just be on, which it is here, or controlled by the envelope. The envelope is a full attack, decay, sustain, release envelope. And moving across, passing the LFO that we've covered there, we have this utility section. We have a fold input, and when we patch into here, this will override the oscillator coming into the filter and VCA. It will cut that signal path. So we can then wavefold this input, so we could patch the oscillator itself to it or external sounds, or leave that turned down as a way of just getting external signals into Mavis. We have a two-way mixer on this patch panel here, and the channel 1 has a level control and a normalized negative voltage. And these negative voltages, which we can call offsets or biases, there's also a positive voltage on this attenuator here. We have a multiple for splitting signals, a sample and hold. We have outputs for things like the LFO, oscillator, envelope, volt per octave ins, rate control for the LFO, external cutoff or PWM control. The keyboard itself can be patched out and its range can be expanded. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour of Mavis there. There's lots of great content from Moog and other people out there. But we'll jump into these patches, pushing semi-modular synths that bit further and advancing our patching and sound design, and really making the most out of Mavis with the help of some modules here. So let's dive in. Sequencing the oscillator and the LFO at audio rate with different volt per octave sequences, giving me this nice duophonic, dual oscillator, dual pattern playing right out of Mavis. If I lose my effects, this is just Mavis's output. I'm using all this cabling here, the orange cables, to blend the oscillator and the LFO in the 2-channel mixer. I'm also using the attenuator, so rather than say channel 2 there just coming straight through at full level, I can control that level in the attenuator and the level of input 1 on that mixer on the 1 level. My LFO here is playing this sequence, and I'm using a nice square wave there, and my oscillator is playing this faster sequence. And I like the sound of them mixed together when they're both just pulses. My gate is coming from that faster oscillator sequence. Bring the VCA back into being controlled by the envelope 2. Bring the effects back in and quickly play around with the levels and the filter, because it's good fun. So here we have a foursome of modulation, and some of it is modulated modulation. I'm using the mixer to mix 2 sources, as well as this blendable 2-source modulation from the envelope and LFO to get 4 bits of modulation into the filter cutoff. Now these are here on data. Let's cancel out the patch and let's go through what's happening. So we have pitch signal to cut off, random voltage, and then the yellow trace there is our envelope, and the LFO, and then modulating the LFO rate with the random voltage. So if I move to just the LFO here, you can see and hear that rate is changing with a nice expressive quadly, 4-way modulated filter cutoff. So let's look at expanding this wavefolder, making it voltage controllable, which is really where the fun is in a modular system. Now all the fold is doing on Mavis and on other wavefolders is increasing the level going into the fold circuit. So by altering the level coming into the fold, we can create a voltage controlled wavefolder. So if I turn fold up full, let's say adjust the level on this VCA coming into the fold, and a VCA will just alter the level of a signal. You can see in here we get the same effect. Now I'm using the envelope out here to CV control this VCA. So if I turn that up, we're controlling the level of the oscillator before it goes into this fold circuit. We can now see that fold knob as effectively the kind of maximum fold depth, if you like. Let's just tune this into something that I like here. You can see in here that folding is changing shape as the envelope increases the level coming into the folder. So here I'm adding a symmetry control to the wavefolder. By adding some additional signals to what comes into fold, we can simulate symmetry, which is a common control found on a wavefolder. Now if you think of these rails here, the Eurorack rails, being the limits of our waveform, as our waves push into them, a wavefolder will fold that wave back down on itself. So if I mix this waveform, which is this green saw wave, just our oscillator here, with an LFO, this one, and it's the blue trace bouncing around, we're going to push into these positive and negative rails where this starts to fold the signal over, and that's giving us a symmetry control, more folding on the top as the LFO goes up positively, and more folding on the bottom as it comes under that center point of the saw wave and hits that negative fold point. So without any LFO modulation, this is the filter open and folding the saw wave. Now if I blend in, this LFO will start to make this fold change. You can see that waveform pushing and pulling on the positive and negative sides of that folding circuit. Now this isn't symmetry, but another way we could animate this wave is to blend across, to blend some pulse wave in there and add some PWM to it. You can't fold a square wave or a PWM wave and it just sounds like PWM, but by blending the saw and the pulse, we can get some animated waveforms into the folder that then gives the folder something else to react to. So here I'm looking at, quote, better wavefolding. Wavefolding's more dramatic, with more range, with the help of a couple of additional modules. So the green trace here is the oscillator from Mavis. The blue trace is this oscillator going through an external filter. As I turn up Mavis's filter, which is just right at the end of the signal chain, we can see that passing through the rest of this circuit. Now as I start to filter this waveform, and it's coming back into the fold here to override the oscillator going into the filter, notice we can get a sine-like wave shape. And folding something clean like a sine or a triangle will give much more drastic results from any kind of wavefolding circuit. So let's check that out. We can go from much cleaner waves to much more rich folded waveforms too. So we filtered this oscillator to get a much cleaner wave, we're modulating its level to get modulated fold amounts. And we could start to play around with this filtering to change from being just a sine wave. Back to that saw wave from Mavis, we still get some great folding results. So let's actually use the LFO from Mavis here to change this filter's cutoff. So this is now this oscillator moving between a more cleanly filtered sine-like tone and a richer, more saw-like tone. The level is still changing in the VCA, and that's giving us a kind of CV fold effect. Now, a Moog high pass is quite a rare thing. We often don't get high passes on mono synths in general. But there's a way we can make a high pass filter with a simple utility, so I wanted to show you how to do it. Here we have a low pass filter. My main out is this blue cable into this mixer, and I'm just recording the output as it is. There's our low pass filter, and I'm taking the oscillator's output, the green cable, into this same mixer. Now if I turn up this filter and invert the oscillator, the thing that's going into the filter, we've lost all that low end, and this now acts like a high pass. Now if we change the resonance here on the filter, it becomes less effective, but we can balance this back out again. A little bit of bleed through there, but by simply inverting the oscillator against the output, we turn this filter into a high pass where we can carve out low end rather than shave off top end. So here's a patch I've been having fun with using the LFO as a sub oscillator. I have some effects on which I'll turn off, and this is the sound of Mavis. My gate rhythm here is triggering some PWM modulation, and it's triggering some filter modulation too. I'm mixing the VCO output into channel 2 of this mixer, because that doesn't have a level input, and I'm happy with my VCO just going straight through. My LFO comes into channel 1 on the mixer, which does have a level, so I can turn that up and add in that sub wave. Who doesn't love a big rich sub? So here I'm using the envelope generator as an oscillator, or rather as a wave shaper, as it's been driven by an oscillator. Now I'm coming out of the envelope here, the EG output, into my scope so you can see it, and we're recording it directly. Now we can drive the envelope by Audiorate sources. We could take the VCO and patch that into the gate input. And because the envelope's been triggered at audio rates, it will oscillate, or rather it will wave shape this oscillator that's coming in, however you want to really think about it. Now the controls here are of course tuned to be a normal envelope, so you don't have much range, but within the kind of bottoms of these turnings, we can actually wave shape just with these kind of finer start points, turning very gently here. So if I now volt per octave control my oscillator that's gating the envelope at its audio rate, this pitch information will pass through. We can start to play around using the envelope like an oscillator. With a very different sound to the oscillator in the Mavis, or any other oscillator really. So here I've expanded out this idea of using the envelope as an oscillator and made a stereo patch. Now the envelope output comes out to a separate filter that's panned hard left, And Moog voice, oscillator into filter into VCA, although it's just droning, is being used on the hard right side of this stereo signal. Here's the Moog sound on its own, just hard right. Pulse wave with some PWM into the filter, with an external envelope here, being used because I'm using the internal one as an oscillator. So nice and simple for that Moog voice there. And here's the envelope through this filter. Opening that up with this sequence playing. We can still do all that nice, interesting wave shaping by driving this, gating it with the actual oscillator there. That through a filter with some envelope modulation. Playing a different rhythm to this one back in on the hard right side of the signal. Gives you an interesting stereo image. So let's take a look at Audiorate pulse width modulation, which I think is a vastly unexplored synthesis technique that leads to some cool overtones you just don't find in many synths. It's either not possible or just not something that's been presented as something you can do. So this patch is really simple. I'll remove my effects, remove my PWM, and it's a pulse wave into the filter with a basic envelope. Simple, basic, classic Moog tone. Now the LFO here is turned up high, and I'm using this positive voltage on the attenuator out into the LFO's rate to push it even higher. Without that, if I turn the attenuator down and turn the PWM up full, that's as high as we can take that LFO. Adding in this positive voltage that's normalised to the attenuator here. With all those lovely overtones that we can just carve back and make that bit more sensible and less piercing with the filter. So now we've checked out doing some Audiorate PWM and pushing this up higher with this positive voltage. Let's explore some further patching. So here I'm volt per octave tracking this Audiorate LFO, playing in sequence with the oscillator. The filter is also tracking the volt per octave. Removing my effects. I'm going to keep the filter somewhat closed down because this does get really harsh in the top end. So try cranking up that LFO with this positive voltage, maybe mixing it with some volt per octave, and then using that to modulate pulse width. You could also modulate the filter with it. Which will give some interesting overtones there. Maybe blended with the envelope. And again, all about just pushing Mavis beyond what the basic tone and the basic signal path is. So here we'll explore some formant or glottal throaty like sounds. If we use the sample and hold here, I'm going to take the input to the sample and hold from the final output of the synth. I'm going to take my output from the sample and hold. And by default, it's already triggering and gating this sample and hold from the LFO. You can see in here we get a more kind of digital, crunchy sound. This is downsampling this waveform. I'll push my LFO up again by using the attenuator's normalized voltage to LFO rate. We get much cleaner results. Oi, oi, oi. It's a sound I really love. So again, that's the output into the sample and hold. Taking the sample and hold is the thing I record and monitor here, and I'm pushing up the LFO rate with this normalized voltage. Get some great vocal-like tones. So here with Mavis, I've made a noise oscillator, and also I have a nice crystal clean sine wave oscillator. Now I'll start with the noise oscillator before we clean this back up. This is noise coming into the fold input from an external noise module, and then I'm using a highly resonant filter to make this drone here to kind of tune in this resonance to a specific note. So then as we start to modulate the cutoff with a volt-per-octave signal, this resonant peak on top of the noise will start to play like a pitched oscillator. Closing my VCA and using my gate pattern here with the envelope. It's a simple way to make a noise oscillator, a noscillator or noisy oscillator. Now if I take the noise out, it's in this attenuator here first just to save me unplugging a cable. This is just the sound of the filter. No oscillator, no LFO, just the resonating filter with a sequence to the cutoff, and that with some delay makes for a really lovely different sound from Mavis from the default signal path. So here we're looking at downsampling and these kind of aliasing type digital overtones that creates and making those pitch track. If we just come out of the main output here, this is the sound of Mavis. However, I'm patching the output of Mavis into the sample and hold. The sample and hold is gated or clocked from this LFO, and I'm coming out of the sample and hold as my audio source. I'm using the mixer again here to mix an offset voltage, the +5 volts in the attenuator, and a copy of my pitch. These yellow cables are my volt-per-octave pitch for the oscillator coming up there, and the other split in the mult coming into this mixer. So this LFO plays the same pitch sequence and is being offset higher. And rather than this just being static, which can work really nicely, having that pitch track can create a more musical overtone that sits on top of your patching. Effects back in, drums back in. Let's quickly run through this dual oscillator patch. This is the LFO tuned up to audio rates. Here it is mixed with that VCO on the patch bay. And here's slamming both these oscillators into the folding. Using the onboard multiple here, I've split the pitch sequence to both the LFO rate and the VCO volt per octave. The envelope now modulates both the filter cutoff and the VCA. And finally, here's the sample and hold clocked by my sequencer, making that filter dance around. Sample and hold to cut off, giving this dancing filter modulation over big dual VCO tones. So here I'm using Mavis to process my effects. If I lose my dry sound here, which is mixed externally, this is the output of Mavis. A folded and quite heavily filter modulated reverb. This is what's coming in to Mavis on the fold input. Now, folding effects can get quite nasty quite quickly, but for those into distortion and heavier textures, can be a great way of getting harsh tones quickly and easily. A little bit of folding goes a long way though, I find, and then possibly filtering that back just helps you drive that folding and filter back the reverb into something that maybe sits in your patch that bit better. My reverb's been pushed and pulled around, driven in that folder. So try processing sounds through that folder, whether they're effects, over oscillators, over sound sources. You might be surprised at the interesting textures and modulation of those sounds you can get by going through Mavis. So here we're getting weird with FM, and it's definitely weird, but I'm liking it. I like exploring weird tones, sampling out sounds that I find interesting and repurposing them, often in more musical kind of contexts. Now losing my drums and effects, this is Mavis with the volt per octave sequence going to both the LFO and the oscillator here, being split in this multiple on these red cables. I'm mixing the volt per octave signal with the offset in the mixer here for the LFO, so that I can push that level higher than I can get it on its own, that is. We could add some envelope modulation blended with the LFO to the oscillator, which gives this weird percussive kind of pitch bend. It's fun just to get weird. Let's bring the drums and effects back in. So here I'm using Mavis as a back end for a synth voice. I'm using Pizza here from Bastel, processed through Mavis, and that's this synth sound. And this is Pizza, effectively coming straight through Mavis unaffected. You can hear it's already a complicated modulation source. I'm going to use Mavis's filter here. I've just got this nice quarter note envelope hitting here. And there's a kind of sidechain swelling effect. I'm going to turn up the cutoff and invert this modulation, so it feels like it's swelling and pumping around this low pass filter. We could also use the VCA here, however I'm just going to leave it droning. And the point was we can use this really great ladder filter to control and shape and modulate external sounds. Let's add some effects back in, my drums back in. And then using the LFO here on Mavis through its own attenuator, because I don't have a spare one here on Pizza, to modulate the wave shape. And I'd love to hear from you with a comment below if you've tried any of these patches, which ones you tried and which ones you liked the most. You can join an amazing community by supporting on Patreon, which gives you access to Discord, bonus videos, exclusive PDFs, all sorts of extras for Patreon supporters. So do check that out if you'd like to support. I'll see you next time. Magic Star Wipe. Bye.